Hello, and welcome to Fantasy Writing for Barbarians. I'm John Negroni. I'm a published fantasy author. I'm also a professional writer and editor for the last almost 11 years now. And very excited because today I actually know what the topic is ahead of time. So I was able to do a little bit more prep than usual. Usually I'm way more off the cuff. And part of this is we were thinking maybe moving forward when we have stuff coming in from listeners of the show, I want to give more detailed advice, more prepped up advice. But if we're going to do something, maybe that's just like a prompt online that wasn't sent in to us, that's probably going to be more off the cuff moving forward. So just a little bit of a formatting note. So that said, I know what the topic is. It's heists, fantasy heists specifically. And I love heists in general, not just fantasy genre heists, but I think a good heist can be a lot of fun. It can be such an easy way to get people invested. I have a fun little heist short story that I've been working on that I want to be able to publish pretty much this month, I guess, or coming into June. We'll see when it comes out. But this one is actually from, or the advice we're going to talk about is from a listener of the show. I think they listen to the podcast. Not exactly sure if they watch ever on YouTube. Either way, welcome. And if you are here on the YouTube channel, don't forget to subscribe. If you are listening to us in the podcast app of your choice, thank you so much. And be sure to subscribe if you haven't already as well. Glad you're here. Okay, so this comes to us from a listener. As I said, let's read this now. Okay. Dear John, first, thank you for the show. It's been a lifeline while I revise my fantasy novel. I've learned so much about pacing, internal stakes, and character arcs from your episodes. I wanted to ask if you had any advice for writing fantasy heists, particularly in a Victorian steampunk world. I'm struggling with keeping the plot tight without losing the sense of wonder and character voice. Here's the premise. The story follows a disgraced engineer who's blackmailed into joining a crew of rogue specialists for one last job, a break-in at a magical vault hidden inside a shifting labyrinth beneath the city. Each team member has a unique skill, but also a secret. Ooh, love that. The vault isn't just guarded by magical traps, it's alive, aware, and slowly reshaping itself to keep them inside. The longer they stay, the more the vault remembers them. So they're doing remembers in scare quotes. Tone-wise, I want you to think of this as Lee Bardugo's Six of Crows meets The Prestige, with a dash of Dishonored and Howl's Moving Castle. What a fun mix. I want it to feel sharp, dark, and a little bit whimsical. Any tips for pacing a heist like this while still developing character arcs and maintaining tension would be amazing. Thank you again, Quill and Cog, Avery, she/her. All right, Avery. Oh my gosh, this is such a strong concept. And thank you so much for writing into the show. Very glad that you did. And I'm glad that this has been able to help you with your fantasy novel so far. And again, if any of you want to write into the show, fantasywritingforbarbarians@gmail.com is our email. We're also in the Discord too, if you want to hang out with us there and let us know what's on your mind. But yeah, so I think this is a very strong concept. I mean, you're clearly asking the right questions, so we can dig into it right away. I'm going to break this down like a developmental editor would. So that's kind of why I wanted to prep ahead of time for this, because I felt like it would maybe be a little bit easier for me to give more detailed advice on how to handle this story all the way through. So we're going to, if you don't know what development editing is, it just means that I'm going to be looking at the structure of the novel so far and how that balances with character, with voice and pacing and all that stuff. And of course, it has to be through the lens of what is the story trying to do? That's the first big thing. And also, how do we let it do that better? So that's taking it another step. All right, so let's start with, I think we should start with number one. A fantasy heist, in my opinion, should be like a pressure cooker. All right. And that means that you should build your structure of the heist like one. Okay, so in other words, I think that heists, we can look at them sometimes as plot devices first and foremost. And I think that that's a little limiting. I think that you have to go beyond like, oh yeah, the heist is a plot device. You need to look at it more as a genre unto itself and structure it the way that you would structure other genres like horror or romance, or more specifically, a rom-com, right? Rom-coms have a very specific structure to them. You don't just have the flavor of rom-com, even though you can. A heist should, in the same way, have its own kind of expectations and varying tropes that you can choose from, things that the audience will both expect and ways that you can surprise them. So, in other words, think of your narrative here as some kind of stage production. You have to have acts, you have to have beats, you have to have those beats escalate pressure, right? Hence the pressure cooker thing. You need to have complications along the way. And really important, you have to have emotional cost. Because at a macro level, your story is going to be following a 6-part arc. And if you don't have those emotional costs along the way, it's going to feel stagnant and flat. If you ever watch a movie or read a book or whatever, and you feel like it's flat, nothing is happening, it's sometimes because the characters are not really growing emotionally at all. They're not being tested emotionally. There's a lot of external stuff happening to them, but there isn't a lot of internalizing of what's happening to them. And it's just feeling stagnant. It's feeling like the characters are just sort of going through the motions. And so that's a whole other discussion we could talk about, because there are ways to do that kind of story correctly. But for the purposes of this, you typically want to go with the emotional cost angle. So in terms of 6-act structure, this is what I always abide by. This is how I really cut my teeth learning how to write and edit. And this is specifically drawing a lot from Michael Haig's 6-act story structure, which we've talked about on Fantasy Writing for Barbarians many times. But just as a refresher, Act 1 is going to be kind of defining the problem itself. It drops you into the status quo of the character. And then we're going to bring in the opportunity, the inciting incident. Here is what this story is going to be. Here are the problems. Act 2 is kind of the planning stage. So this is when character secrets are introduced. You're starting to get a better sense of what the character needs to become in order to be their true self, that kind of information. Act 3 should be when, and actually, you know what? I'm going to break this down by the heist story itself, a typical heist story. So I'm going to start over. So Act 1, defining the problem, would start with recruiting, right? Who is going to be in the heist? We need these characters to be in the heist for it to work, right? Makes sense? Act 2, it should be when we're planning the heist, okay? So this is when they mention the character secret stuff. So I would actually bring that in here too, because we're going to be learning about the characters, what their different flaws are, how they kind of function with each other. And we're planning the heist itself. We're setting up what the heist is going to be. Act 3, and remember, this is Act 3 of 6. This is going to be when the heist actually can begin. So sometimes people wait too long to start the heist. That's not a good idea. You want the heist to start around the midpoint-ish, but maybe slightly before the midpoint, something like that, because you need the stakes and everything to escalate. You need momentum. Act 3 is where you can begin, like the break-in or whatever it is. And then you should have the world starting to kind of push back against these characters. They need to face real challenges. There should be some adversity here. That's going to keep things exciting. Then you go into Act 4 of 6. And in Act 4, this is really where we're going to get our midpoint twist. So we're in, like, at this point, firmly the midpoint. And that means things should be going sideways. Something the characters didn't know is going to be revealed to them, that sort of thing. And this should basically be what, not the all is lost moment necessarily, but at least beginning the all is lost. It's going to be what propels us into, it seems like everything is going to fall apart and we don't know what's going to happen next. That brings us to Act 5. And Act 5 should be about the personal cost of the characters. The secrets that they've been holding in surface, the questions get answered, and then that's going to be that final push into here's what we have to do in order to be successful, right? And that's when you get to Act 6, the payoff, right? This is the part of Ocean's 11 where, you have the resolution, you have the consequences. Here's what's going to happen, as a result of whether or not we were successful. That's how you end the story. So that should basically be the structure. And you're going to deviate from that quite a bit. Obviously, it's not going to be a perfect one-to-one, but a basic heist should have some kind of similarity with what I just went through, depending on a lot of different factors. But if it's totally off the rails from what I just went through, that's a huge risk. That's going to signal really some things for the reader that maybe this heist isn't going to be what I was hoping for. And it can create some friction between you, the author, and the readers. And again, I talked a little bit about the plot device stuff. And I'd say that you should have type plotting for sure, because with a heist, especially, you need a lot of really good cause and effect to make all those acts feel connected and not just kind of scattershot. So the cause and effect should flow like a Rube Goldberg machine, if you know what that is. So every action causes a reaction emotionally and interpersonally and systematically. South Park, the guys who made the South Park show, they talk about this, Trey Stone and Matt Parker, where it should always feel like when you're doing a story, therefore should be in between all your beats. So they say every beat should be this happens, therefore this happens. And they say that if you instead have this happens and then this happens, that's a sign that it's not right, that it's a little bit boring. No, everything needs to lead into the next thing. That's how they kind of do their stories. And it's a great, foundation for some advice for all of you that therefore typically is going to have a cause and effect. It's similar to like yes and or no but, which is another way people like to frame this in the sense that every scene should ask a question. Do they make it to, do they make it to the bank vault? Yes, but this happens. Or yes, and this happens next. So there should always be some kind of flow there that you should be able to trace your story along effectively. And in this case, when the vault thing shifts, like they were talking about the email, the vault can kind of change and everything. We should really look into how is that going to rewire the emotional stakes between the different crew members. So when a secret for one of the crew members is revealed, how does that force a shift, right, in the team dynamics and the strategy? There should be a cause and effect there that makes a lot of sense. And fantasy heists especially thrive a lot on friction, right? Because you have these worlds that can be exciting, anything can happen. Friction is going to make everything feel like a battle. The world itself is going to fight back against these characters, and that's what gives it the fantasy twist in many ways. And you can let your characters fight each other in ways that kind of move the story forward. Think of something like even Avengers, not really a heist movie necessarily, but it's a team-up movie. It's an ensemble movie, and one of the more exciting things about that movie is when they're fighting each other before they get to the point where they can unite around the common threat and all of that. And that's just a very standard but effective way of telling that kind of story with a group of people who are at odds and need to come together in order to win the day. So that's the first thing. And that was a lot. I know this next thing will be a little bit shorter, but I would say that when it comes to world building your fantasy heist, you need to treat it like a locked room or like an escape room. You need to give us a bunch of rules and then you need to break them. This is one of the most crucial things when it comes to fantasy heists. Give us rules and then break those rules. It's very weird because it's different from what we usually get with different kinds of stories across, genres, but heists are where we get to have a little bit more fun here, and that's why I like them so much. So let's look at the sentient vault again. So you talked about how really this is like the breakout feature. It's the most interesting thing about your pitch, in my opinion. And it's really doing something smart because it is turning the setting into an antagonist. That's fun. That's, a little bit different. We don't get that all the time. And I think what you can do here is you can give us just enough of the rules of this setting so that the reader starts to feel secure, and then you can bend those rules before ultimately snapping them. And what you do there is if it suddenly feels like the rules can break for a reason that makes sense, then it starts to feel like the characters have agency, that the characters are in a battle and are making ground, I think would be the right way to say that. That's a little punny, but making ground against their circumstances. And yeah, this is what we can call like a controlled surprise for the reader. All this means that Kate Browning talked to me about this once. It's where the reader doesn't necessarily feel tricked. It's that they feel tested, right? So Brandon Sanderson does this a lot with Mistborn. The people really like the magic system in Mistborn. It's really fun. It's a cool magic system, but I think one of the reasons people like it more than other ones, is even other ones that Brandon Sanderson has done, is because he keeps adding to the magic system. He kind of breaks the rules of it without breaking the logic of it. And that's kind of why it's fun, because then you're like, oh, what could happen next with this magic system? It feels like it's alive and it has these standard rules, but the rules aren't so ironclad that, like with science, sometimes you can ask really good questions and the characters themselves ask really good questions and can do smart, interesting things to make that magic system their own. And that's a really exciting thing to experience as a reader. So Mistborn does that super well. And you can do that as well with this vault, a character figuring out something about the vault or a way to use the vault in a way that kind of breaks the rules in their favor, right? So you, of course, need to define this more because I don't know for sure like how the vault remembers people or what it does when it recognizes them or what the cost might be for being remembered, that kind of thing. Like, I can't say too much about that since I haven't read the story, but I think that whatever you manage to do, just make sure that you are paying off the information about the vault in different stages. So what I mean is, if you have a very specific rule about the vault that's important, set it up in like chapter 3 or whatever it is, and then break that rule, let's say in like chapter 7, a few chapters later, and then subvert it completely in chapter 10, right? So it's the rule of threes. And I'm just using the chapter names arbitrarily. It could be whatever. But the idea is that it's not too much distance. It depends on the pacing of the novel, but it's just enough so that it feels like the readers being reminded of like, oh, and this might be true, and this might be true. And then boom, you are in place to subvert with a cool twist. Heists are really fun, but they can be difficult because you have to get the twists right. If the twists are too predictable, if they are, if they're a little bit too obvious, that can be a problem. But if they're not obvious enough, there's a balance you have to do there. You want the reader to feel smart for predicting these things correctly. So it should feel like they had to think about it, not like, oh, well, then this is going to happen. And then 100 pages later, they're proven right. And they're like, that was easy. You don't want that to happen. And one way you can get around that is if you feel like you've brought in some information where it does kind of hint strongly, you want to be able to pay that off quick. You don't want to wait too long so that they'll feel like, oh, I caught this like 2 chapters ago. That feels better than catching something 20 chapters ago, is all I'm trying to say. All right, so that was number 2. Number 3, I would say that character voice needs to be carefully managed here, particularly when it comes to tone. Because in Victorian steampunk especially, and a lot of the examples they use like Dishonored and Howl's Moving Castle, you probably want a sharp, dark tone, which makes sense. And you want a little bit of that whimsy like you have with Howl's Moving Castle. It's a nice kind of combination of things, but you have to balance tone in a way where you're using what's called voice level control, I think is what it's called. So think of something like Gideon the Ninth or Lockwood and Company. So these kinds of stories keep the tension really high while still letting the protagonist be very, very human, and I mean human, like people human, personhood. So they can be funny, they can be mean, they can be petty, they can be loyal, they can be furious. There's always emotion in the voice, no matter what's going on with them. And that keeps the tension really high. And so in a heist story in particular, you want every crew member to bring something to this. They should bring some kind of tonal contrast. It sounds very obvious, but you just have to double check your notes on this. So for example, maybe you have like the grim soldier. Maybe you have the nervous novice. You could have the flirty person who always has a plan, right? And then you have the protagonist who you want to make sure the protagonist isn't vanilla, who isn't Rick Flag from, the Suicide Squad movies. Like you want the main character, to have some kind of pain or flaw, like a disgraced engineer or something. An emotional baseline would be a good way to go for that. And once you kind of chart that out, then you can start to bring in the subversions, like the grim soldier, but they have a heart of gold. The nervous novice, but they have the potential to be the most powerful, magic user in the universe. The flirt who always has a plan, but they're in love with one person who will never see them that way. So like finding ways to like, okay, you have the basic character sheet, but what's the wrinkle that you can bring into that character to make them feel more alive and not just a list of characteristics? And so, yeah, once you have all the vault stuff happen and you have this tonal contrast with all the characters, then you can balance the tone and how they react to the circumstances within the heist. The tone will shift as the stability of their situation starts to erode. So it's a pressure cooker, like I said. What happens when these characters are pushed to their limits, when things go sideways? You want to set that up early so that when whatever happens, where maybe they lose their cool, maybe one person steps up and you didn't expect it, you want all that to feel natural. You want to feel like it's coming from human beings, okay? And in that case, what you can do along the way is write character interiority in a way that can be more like a barometer. So measuring air pressure, measuring the pressure of the character when they're under stress or whatever it is, right? You can let their thoughts, whatever POV you're doing, carry the tone for you. And then if they don't have interiority, if you have these characters who you're not in their heads, you can still have them talk and contrast with the other characters in ways that reveal that interiority through what they say or don't say and all of that. All right. And so then number 4, I would say that heists themselves, typically people undercount the emotional arcs in them a little too much, and they get caught up in the logistics instead. I kind of alluded to this earlier, but I think that what readers don't just come to heists or enjoy heists for all the clever tricks and complicated logistics. They like that stuff, but there's got to be a little bit more. Otherwise, it's just so-so, and nobody wants to share your story with others. It's just like, oh yeah, I read that, it was all right. Instead of like, oh, I read that, you should check it out, it was really good. So that's the thing that you're going for as a writer. And I think more so than anything, it's not just emotion itself. It's not just like, oh yeah, this character was sad when this happened. It's emotional transformation. This character went through an emotional ringer, and here's how they came out the other side. that is the element, the missing ingredient for a lot of writers who are trying to get to that next place where they're not just writing stuff to write it, but they're coming at it, or they're coming out of a story with emotional transformation with the characters. That's what turns a novel with some cool fantasy stuff into something that has a fandom where people flock to that because they feel like those characters. They went through that emotional transformation with them. And fantasy heists need to have this as well. And to do it, you have to build really smart emotional arcs that mirror the different beats of the heist itself. So every single team member, or, well, the ones that survive, should enter with a flaw that's going to be tested by the job. And then when they come out of it, there needs to be a consequence. There needs to be some kind of transformation. And it can be for the worse. It depends on what you want to do. But in a lot of ways, it can also be very, even if a character dies, they can still have that kind of transformation through their legacy or whatever it is. There's all kinds of things you can do there. So in this case, if you're trying to figure out, like, okay, what am I going to do for each of these characters? Try to ask yourself, for example, what does your protagonist actually believe at the start of the heist? And then how is that belief going to be disproven over the course of the story? How does that character need to change in order to survive the vault or all the different circumstances that are happening in this heist? And lastly, who is this character by the time they walk out of the heist and come away with it either being successful or not successful, whatever, right? And this is especially important with ensemble casts. I'm kind of narrowing in the protagonist, but you want the crew fracturing and then fusing, like I was talking about before, because that feels more meaningful. That makes the victory feel more meaningful. And so then number 5, the last thing, and I always give this advice, not just as a writer, but also, when I was a film critic and anytime I'm looking at different manuscripts and whatever, number 5, let it be weird. Okay. There's not enough weirdness in fantasy. Fantasy is the place to be weird. It's where we can let our weird flags fly. And too much of it, in my opinion at least, tends to opt for a little sanitized, a bit safe, a little bit one note. I like weirdness though. And especially when you're doing Victorian steampunk, you have a great aesthetic there, right? And steampunk kind of brings about a kind of a natural unease to the environment with all this, steam, but also like the machinery, it's unreliable. There's a personality to that kind of setting baked in, and you can use that to bring a bit of weirdness and quirkiness to the setting. And when you bring that weirdness in this context, it makes everything have a cool, like it's elegant, it's kind of cool, but also it's really unstable. Weird, terrible things can happen all the time. The vault itself could have weird characteristics where the environment itself, like, it just shifts or it does weird things, or maybe the walls talk, whatever you want to do. You could have blood coming out of the street. You can have traps that feel, kind of silly, like a 3-year-old made them or came up with their ideas. Weirdness in fantasy is such a missed opportunity for so many stories. I think could be even better if they heighten that stuff up, because I think sometimes, especially with heist, we get so bogged down with like the logic and the magic systems and the rules and the themes, all the, the emotional transformations. Okay, but where's the fun? Where's that whimsy I was talking about before? And you can really bring that out through, humor and weirdness and, little things, little quirks that just kind of feel personal to you as an author. What's the thing that, kind of makes you, that you kind of see the world in a different way, and you can filter your story through that highly specialized, individualized lens. So that's it for me. Avery, if I were your editor, which I feel like I kind of am at this moment, I would sum it up by saying what you have so far, it's definitely working. You're on a great path. You don't need my help necessarily, but hopefully I'm going to speed you along to some awesome discoveries that you're going to make on your own. I think you have a killer premise. I think you have a really cool setting. I think your instincts are very sharp. I can tell. I think the next level for you is to trust that your story needs to do a lot of heavy lifting, maybe more heavy lifting than you had in mind. You need to build out the rules that you have in place so that you can break them. And I think that you need to make sure that you're always pacing your reveals to kind of mirror that emotional change I was talking about. Really pay attention to that. Pay attention to the word counts. Like, not along the way. You don't want to get too bogged down in word counts there, but you want to, kind of pay attention to like, how long has it been since this happened? Is there enough time? That kind of thing. And lastly, if you're going to do a lot of really good twists, just remember to keep them personal, keep them weird, keep them you. I think this kind of story, when you do it right, it can really linger in a reader's head, really make them feel like, that was a cool read. I feel like I had a lot of fun with that. It was fast paced, and I felt like it mattered, to the characters themselves, so it mattered to me, the reader, right? So yeah, I hope that helps you, and I hope hopefully it helps anybody listening or watching who is also trying to work on a fantasy heist of some kind. And listeners, if you have, of course, your own project or question for the show, please don't hesitate to send us an email. fantasywritingforbarbarians@gmail.com is how you can do that. We'd love to feature it if it fits the show. And as always, keep on writing if that's what you feel like doing.